Welcome, Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. Again, I seem to see this every week when I have my show, is that I'm really excited for our guest today. Like many people I've met on my journey, I've met on LinkedIn primarily, but all social media platforms. So there is some good news to social media out there. It's hard to find, but meeting people like Angela has been great. Angela is the director of special projects with Recovery International, and we have very similar interests, very similar passions, and we're trying to find ways that our organizations can collaborate with each other. But the fact that she's in the mental health space and has done some really neat, innovative things and projects I want to talk about today, I'm really excited to have you on the show, Angela. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the invitation.
Now, you're in Illinois, right?
I am, just right outside of Chicago.
Suburb, right? One of the million suburbs outside of Chicago.
One of the suburbs, right? Western suburbs. Our office is located in Oak Brook.
Okay.
We also have, that's our headquarters, but we also have an office in the San Diego, California area too.
Now, is Recovery International, is this your baby? Is this your idea? Is this an organization you founded?
It is not. I have to give credit to someone else. 85 years ago, this recovery method was founded by Dr. Abraham Lowe.
Okay.
And so we're going back to 1937 here. It's been around quite a while. And this was a method that he developed while working with his psychiatric patients in the hospital. And he was trying to figure out how his patients could help themselves between his visits with them, right? You can imagine the psychiatrist has that precious 1 hour that you get with your patients.
And this was back in the 30s, you said?
Even back in the 30s. And what he was hearing in his time with them was often, a lot of kind of complaints about these average daily kind of common problems, which took up a lot of time and didn't allow him to go deeper into the real issues to help treat his patients with things that they were dealing with. It could have been bigger depression issues, right, or grief or loss or whatever it might be. So he was working on this program and basically a self-help method for his patients to deal with these small events that happen and get them worked up during the week. And so he came up with this method, and it is self-help and it is cognitive behavioral based. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that CBT wasn't a thing when he was doing this.
Interesting.
So he is credited by Aaron Beck as being, one of the founders of CBT. So that's really kind of interesting. But yeah, this is a self-help method. And Dr. Lowe died really kind of young, and it was really his patients that were using this method that brought it to everyone else and really started creating these meetings nationwide. And they're peer-led, obviously, by people who have lived experience and are trained in this method, and those are our leaders of the programs. And we have 170 meetings that occur all over the country, including in Canada, Ireland, India. So we're even worldwide at this point. But yeah, most of those meetings are happening across the US by Zoom, phone, of course, some in person, and even chat. And we have a Facebook meeting page too.
Is the template kind of like AA? I mean, it kind of sounds a little bit.
The template it's a 4-step method.
Okay.
And it's a very structured method. So in this method, you focus on reporting the incident or the event that got you worked up.
Okay.
You're identifying what those symptoms and those feelings were and those thoughts that you were feeling when you were in the moment. And then you start applying our tools. And these tools we also call them spots, but they're sentences. And they're basically a way to help drop the judgment and turn that negative, insecure thought you were having into something more positive. So in that process, you're applying those thoughts and you're kind of working out that issue. And the very last step of this process is really to reflect and say, what would have happened in this situation before I applied those tools and used this recovery method? And how is it different now? And it's a very simple, we say it's simple, but it's not easy, of
Yeah,
course,
I like
because
that phrase.
in the moment, right, when you're getting worked up
Right.
about something, you need to stop yourself. You need to put the brakes
Yeah.
on. You need to say, okay, let's let all those tools come to the forefront of your brain to work out this issue and learn how to drop the judgment.
It makes me think of my dad being a retired doctor years ago. He used to say, things like weight loss. He says it's simple, just your outtake and your intake. Do the math. And he'd say, but the problem is, it's not easy.
It's not easy. Right,
A
right.
lot of
So
these
it does
things
take
are
a
fairly from a pragmatic mind, like mine tends to be. You know, it can be simple and it can be easy. It just depends on how you frame it, right?
Right. And like anything, it takes practice, it takes commitment, it takes work. So we do have people who attend meetings once a week. We have some people who don't attend at all, but they still practice their recovery every day.
Mm-hmm.
And we have people who are attending multiple meetings every week. And the meetings are generally are free. There are some that require a membership. But you can find a meeting anywhere, and at the end of the meeting, we'll do a virtual, if it's on
Mm-hmm.
Zoom, pass the basket, and people can donate what they can. If they are members of recovery, which is really nominal, it's $35 a year. They do get some extra benefits for that as well. So we encourage membership, but it certainly isn't required. We want this to be available to anyone, anywhere, anytime.
And I assume you get this asked because it was the first thing that popped into my head when I ran across Recovery International was the term recovery when this was in the 30s and the idea came out is different than recovery today. The implication is recovery from alcohol, drugs. So most of my friends who are recovery advocates, the image I see is the recovery space in regards to alcohol primarily or drugs. So recovery for you guys, based on that table being set, how would you describe Recovery International then?
Well, initially it was developed, again, we're going back to the 1930s. It was developed because Dr. Lowe was giving his patients the next step after they were hospitalized. So
Gotcha.
in that sense, it was,
Recovery. Yep.
recovery, here is your next step to integrate back into, the social world again. Um, the Recovery International has gone through a couple of name changes, and at one point it was called Low Self-Help Systems,
Okay.
and that perhaps more accurately describes what we do because it is self-help. And we do have people who also go to 12-step meetings, who join our meetings, but certainly it's not necessarily geared toward people who are only recovering from alcohol or drugs.
Mm-hmm.
We have people who join recovery because they might have overall stress issues, depression, bipolar,
Traumatic event maybe in their past.
anger, anything, really anything. And the thing about our program and our meetings is we don't ask. That's not what we're interested in, because remember when I said we're kind of unique in this self-help, and that we focus on these daily, average, kind of common,
Yeah.
trivial is what we
Right.
call them, right? Trivial events. And no matter what your diagnosis is, or even if you don't have a diagnosis, you're still dealing with those daily,
Yeah.
trivial, average, common
Yeah.
events that can get you worked up. So we don't ask if people offer that. That's one thing, but certainly that's not, criteria for being part of the meeting. So we do get people with a number of different kinds of diagnoses, or not,
Is
as
there
I
a
said, because
is
it's
there
helpful
is there
to
a
anyone.
minimum or maximum age that you're kind of marketing to, or where is everything gravitated to? I guess where is kind of things settled, where your average person is that a white 35-year-old male, or kind of what type of people are you drawing into this?
Yeah, well, like I said, we've been around for a long time, and we do have an audience that tends to skew a little bit older.
Okay,
Um,
like what's a little
so
bit older?
most of Yeah, most, and I can say this because I'm over 50. So
Come on.
most are over 50.
Okay.
However, saying that, of course, what we are trying to do is target younger,
Right.
because we know this is an important program, and it's a helpful program. And those people who are over 50 who are using the
They have
program
kids.
say, you know, if only I had this when I
Yep.
was younger,
Yep.
if only I knew about it when I was younger.
Right.
So at the in the middle of 2020, with everything else going on, we developed a teen young adult focused workbook, and it's an introduction to the recovery method, but it's done in a graphic novel style, so basically
What's it
comics.
called?
um, it's called Power Your Mind:
Oh,
Tools
wait a
to Build
minute. I just
Recovery.
happen to have one here.
Is that what you happen to
Yeah,
have there,
I
Jeff?
just happen to have one here. Yeah, had the opportunity to glance through this after I got it, and boy, yeah, you're right. It's definitely where I see a shift. I don't know about the history of Recovery International, but where the focus looks like is where it should be, and that's the next generation coming up, Gen Z specifically. And if we don't find a way to right that ship, what we're doing is for nothing.
Right. Yeah. So, 2020 was interesting. So, this book had been in development before
Okay.
any of that happened.
Okay.
So coincidentally, we worked on it much harder, and we got it launched at the end of 2020. And I have two kids, so I have two teenagers at home.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine when I was working on this and developing it, and I reached out to them because, of course, they're right here and they're my they're my target audience. I would go to them and say, "Hey, sort through some of these tools or spots and tell me which are your favorite, and what do you think of this activity?" So I got their feedback during development of this. So anyone can purchase that Power Your Mind workbook. It's on Amazon. It's on our website, recoveryinternational.org. We have a bookstore. Anyone can use that independently. But my focus has been these youth groups, school groups, after school groups, faith-based groups. They're already established groups. Reaching out to them to say, how about a facilitated workshop with the kids having this workbook? So we're helping them use it along the way. So I've been doing a number of train the trainer programs where I'm teaching this method and this program to the leaders of those youth groups.
Mm-hmm.
Because often what happens is they don't necessarily want me coming in. They don't want the stranger coming in to do the program.
Right.
They want their own youth leaders, their own teachers, their own counselors. Those are the people who really should be delivering that program. They know the kids. So yeah, so my job has become to teach them how to use that and give them all the tools so they can be successful in doing that.
Yeah, it just seems like we can't have too many options for this mental health disaster we've seen to create. A lot of it's been created ourselves, like social media and the things that we've kind of invented for ease and comfort have actually just been massive distractions to our inability to deal with what life throws at us, and we just it's almost like we're drowning our ambition to fix ourselves by alcohol, TikTok. They're distractions. The hour I spend on TikTok looking at cat videos is an hour I don't have to look in the mirror and say I need to improve my life. Just like alcohol does. It distracts you from dealing with what you should be dealing with.
Kind of numbs things. So so I mentioned this whole trivial situation. And so when you're talking about the big things that people are dealing with, we're hoping by learning how to deal with the little things, you do end up building that resilience, right? And automatically what you find is really interesting, because as you practice this method, some of the tools become your favorites. For instance, my daughter made it through middle school with people do things that annoy us, not necessarily to annoy us. Okay.
Yeah.
That's one of our tools.
I like that one. We take everything so personal. Yeah.
Right. It's one of my favorites too. And so by all of a sudden you find yourself in this situation, you realize you're getting worked up, and these tools just pop into your head. You don't even necessarily ask for them, right? You don't think about it, but they're popping in
Mm,
and they're right there for you when you need them. And you go, oh yeah, I should probably stop. I should just put the brakes on here for a moment and think about, is this really a trivial situation? Will this make the 6 o'clock news? Probably not.
right.
Is this common? Is it average that it happens to most people? Probably, right? But building that resilience to those can really help you when the bigger things, if the bigger things happen later in life. And recovery is also a really good adjunct to professional care. So we're not here to take the place of a counselor, a therapist, any kind of licensed professional. We are here to be that help. I mean, you can imagine, again, if you get that precious hour with your therapist, they don't want to hear about how Starbucks got your coffee order wrong for an hour.
Right.
That that's
Yep.
not a situation that is allowing them to get deeper and to delve deeper. But
Right.
that's something you can work out on your own during the week. So really important adjunct to professional care. So we also have licensed counselors, doctors that do recommend their patients go to recovery meetings in between their visits.
One of the hardest things that we run into to design processes and symptoms for systems for kids, young adults, Gen Z, is attention spans today. It's like 8 seconds. I think they say on some formats like TikTok, it's like 8 seconds, but it's designed that way to not hold your attention very long. But how do you get? I mean, that's where I look at, like, when we're designing our app and we're going to launch this probably when this posts. I mean, we're a couple months out and recording podcasts, but we were trying to think of, how do we get kids to engage in something that even they know is in their best interest, but without gamifying it, without dumbing it down where we just have clowns everywhere and balloons going up. I mean, so yeah, there's a fine dance between getting kids, quote, addicted, for lack of a better term, using dopamine, getting them excited about something, but then making it so it's effective in a very minimal amount of time. How do you, I guess, do you have any suggestions, or maybe your programs talk about this, but how do you, in such a fast food world we live in, mental health didn't happen overnight. You didn't get to where you're at because of what happened yesterday. It's a long
Right.
process that happens in your childhood all the way up to the age of 14 is the age of first use. So I'm rambling a little bit, but it's like, how do we get minds to slow down, take time, be attentive? And I'm talking about young minds, not me and you, but young minds.
I don't know if I have an answer
I
to
don't
that,
have
Jeff,
one.
but I will tell you how we designed our book because of that. So traditional recovery program involves people reading a novel or more novels that were written by Dr. Lowe,
Mm-hmm.
and these are the books that all of these tools are coming out
Okay.
of. I know today there aren't a lot of young people who are willing to sit down with a novel. I know my own kids, as much as I read to them when they were
Yeah.
little every day, right? Hoping to make them
Right.
readers. They did not turn out to be readers at this point. So we did this workbook in basically sound bites, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a novel or 2 pages of the story of someone to illustrate this method, we broke it down into a 1-page panel comic strip.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the book is 7 chapters. And if people
It's
are
well
going
done.
to
I'm
be a
looking through it right now. It's very well done.
yeah, and if people are going to do this as a facilitated workshop, then what we're suggesting is 1 chapter a week, and that's it. A quick 45 minutes with the group, and we can go over a couple concepts. They learn a couple tools, and they get to practice those during the week when a situation happens, and then we build on it. So, it's not 8 seconds. It's hard to really kind of, do this in 8 seconds, sound bites, but it is that shorter bit. Our workshops are very active too. I mean, we have a lot of interaction, and we have the kids up and moving around and
Right.
doing activities, and of course that always makes the time go a lot faster.
Would you say you're geared more towards prevention or treatment?
Well, certainly if there's an after school group or a faith group or anyone using this, you could have a mix of students in that program. You can have some who do have a diagnosis of some type,
Mm-hmm.
or you could have kids that don't. I like to look at this as, for that age group, at least prevention.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it could be an adjunct to some therapy that they're already getting as well. But let's go into life at this young age as a teen, realizing that the pimple that you get on your face in the morning isn't the end of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's common and average for most people, and you can deal with those thoughts and emotions that invade your brain because of it. So I like to think of it as, yeah, let's just get them in that mindset especially before I think they go off to college.
So pretty much everybody I've ever met in the advocacy space or works with improving lives or has a passion comes from somewhere. Where does yours come from?
Mine comes from a couple of places. I mentioned I have the two teens, and I watched them during the pandemic and the shutdown of schools, just like everyone else watched their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one that didn't do so well. We certainly were seeking out professional help.
Yeah.
And it was a very difficult time for my son to actually be certainly focused on school and in that moment and be separated from his friends. And then I also saw that social piece that really kind of went, wait, what's going on? I mean, friendships changed a lot. It was difficult for both of them. So that's one place I come from. At the time that I was brought into recovery to help develop this teen program, my mother was also going through late stage dementia,
Yeah.
then diagnosed as Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So I was a caregiver along with my sister. And I will tell you, I was dealing with stress
Yeah.
and anxiety and anger
Yeah.
at that time because I certainly didn't understand the disease, and the disease itself and that diagnosis, I want to be clear about
Yeah.
this, is not trivial. Okay. That's not the trivial part. But some of the things that she would do and say because of what was happening with her brain, those were the trivial things.
Yeah.
She would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning because she thought it was 3 in the afternoon and she was ready to go to lunch.
Yeah.
So those phone calls in the middle of the night, it certainly were trivial. When we talk to someone who has memory issues, you are bound to be asked the same question
Mm-hmm.
over and over, maybe 10, 20 times in a span of 5 minutes,
Yeah.
right? It works you up, but it's trivial.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know I needed this program until I learned about the program.
Interesting.
Because all of a sudden I started applying this going, well, wait a minute. She can't control what's going on here. This isn't really a big deal compared to what she's dealing with, the diagnosis itself. And I learned to manage my thoughts and my impulses through that process. And I really think it saved our relationship. So I think as much emphasis as we put on this for someone who is suffering from a mental illness, I have to do a shout out to the caregivers who, a caregiver of someone with a child with a learning disability, emotional disability, caring for an adult, whatever it is, caregivers really do take on a lot, and they suffer with a lot of stress and anxiety as well. So this could be a good place to come for a little perspective and a little self-help therapy to kind of work those situations out.
I'm so happy you brought this up because I have a radio show here that we do every week. And last week, our show was on mental wellness in the caregiving for caregivers. Because I think, as an advocate of mental wellness, and I'm on a lot of social media platforms simultaneously, I bump into people all the time and they're heroes to me. the nurses. They're the ones, getting yelled at by people about masks and vaccines, and they're just foot soldiers. They're out there doing what they signed up. But it just seems to me that, I don't know exactly where I was going with that thought. Talk about memory skills.
But the
Yeah.
caregiver
Okay.
piece.
So it's ironic that I forgot in the middle of talking about forgetting. But
That's okay.
no, that's attention deficit at its best. So my mom had the same issue you had, and she passed away from those early stages as well. But the caregiver, we did a show just on caregiving, and I meet so many people that are just putting out fires for so many people, and they're heroic at it and they're amazing. But then they get home and they turn on the TV and they're having their marital problems and they're drinking too much wine and they can't make their mortgage payment. And, and then all that heaps on them. Like they were able to push it away when they're at work because work distracts them from dealing with themselves. And then they get home and so there's lots of, I think just last year, I think there were two pretty renowned national advocates. I think they were both women too, that took their own lives, that they ran recovery centers and they ran rehab facilities. And I have to think it's that dynamic where you're just helping people, which is so rewarding, but you're not really helping the inner you. And so when you're left to look in the mirror, there's nothing, you feel there's nothing looking back. And a lot of caregivers, it's a rewarding job while they're doing the work, but afterwards it's very punishing.
Yeah, we have to remember that caregivers, and even, licensed professionals,
Yeah.
they could benefit too from using this, and just that time to give yourself that mental health break.
Yeah.
So here I'm gonna do one of my first little concepts here of recovery. This is an important one. It's not the only one, but it's an important one. And we learn to self-endorse in our program. It's a big part of our program. So if you want to take a moment, Jeff, and just do this, pat yourself on the back, right over there. There are things that we can endorse for, especially if we're struggling, right? You might be struggling to get out of bed in the morning, and you move your muscles and you get out of bed and you just stop and say, I'm going to endorse for that. If you wait for someone else to tell you, you're doing a good job and hey, that's great, it probably is never going to happen.
Right.
So we don't wait for that, right? We're just going to self-endorse. We're going to acknowledge what we're doing for our own mental health, our own benefit, and pause and do that. So we have a lot of tools just for endorsing and remembering to do that. So I think that's one thing as a caregiver, as a professional, people have to learn to do as well. Just stop, take a moment and say, what did I do today that I can endorse for? So Jeff, I'm going to give you that moment. What did you do today? Can you think of one or two things that you can self-endorse for?
Yes. Oh, you want to know them?
If you want to share
Yeah.
them.
I had an opportunity to pitch our app to a potential collaborator, and they liked it, and they're really excited about it. So
wonderful. Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to endorse for. One of the things I'm going to share I can endorse for is this workbook that we've been talking about, Power Your Mind. It's currently on Amazon for just under $20. And I know that can be a barrier. So I am taking that book and shrinking it down a little bit and trying to get it closer to the $12 price. And I'm also trying to do something that's more of a fillable format for schools to use, because I know they can't afford $20 a workbook for every kid. So I just finished doing that last night, and I'm going to do a, pat on my back and endorse for getting through it. It was one of the bigger projects that I've had to do.
How do you define mental health?
Wow, that's a tough one. I could have prepared for that.
I want to hear your answer.
For me personally, my definition would be feeling good and feeling productive. I remember the times that when I did struggle, it was interfering with my ability to live, laugh, love, or learn. There was some interference with that. So to me, if I'm going to define better mental health or good mental health is that you have the ability to live, laugh, love, or learn, and nothing is interfering with that.
Mm.
And if something is interfering with that, and if you don't feel right, I suggest you seek help, because there's so much out there right now. There's really no need for anyone to suffer alone at this point. And there's so many people, like what, 1 in 5,
Yeah.
that need mental health support. So certainly you're not alone. But I think that would be my definition. And I have been in that situation where, again, because of what I was dealing with my mom, or some years ago when my brother had a pretty big illness, that it certainly did interfere with all of those things. Live, laugh, love, or learn. Nope, wasn't happening. And I did recognize that I needed help.
So I was asked a while back about if there's any like top 3 things, or like, people always want things in a little compartmentalized box. It's like, what have you learned, Jeff, on the Living Undeterred journey? And so I came up with like my 3 pillars of Living Undeterred. And every time I think about them as people are talking, I see if I can, supplant your, if I could flip flop and put some of my, what I think are the big 3, and see if they fit your narrative. And so some of the things you're talking about, I wanted to ask you what's your thoughts on the impact of expectations. Our expectations about, for example, the one I use in my talks are about death. We don't expect to die. So we have this real false, unhealthy relationship with death that we all know is coming. So expectations, I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that, about especially kids and how they just expect every day to be unicorns and rainbows. The second thing is preparation. What are you doing in your day to prepare yourself for the unfairness and the brutality of living? So I have expectations and preparation, and then my third one is evolution. And that's like, how are you allowing things to be a part of your story, not fight it like it didn't happen to me, or be shameful of something happening. So I wanted to ask you if those 3 things you think about when you're designing things, or maybe you have a different top 3 or something like that you could help people with.
Well, it's funny you said expectations, because one of our tools is, in fact, expectations can lead to disappointments. And there's a couple of other expectations there. Lower your expectations and your performance will rise. I think what we're doing right now with young people in particular is we put so much on them to be the best at everything. How many AP courses are you going to take? And are you in travel, travel sport X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And are you going to get a scholarship for that? And there's so much pressure there that we don't talk about the fact that it's okay just to be average. Average is okay. And when we talk to ourselves in our recovery program, we say, you did an average job. It's average and it's fine. And maybe we'll say high average, but no one's exceptional. And we can't measure that exceptional. There's no way to measure that.
But you're only average when you compare yourself to other people. Right. Other than that, there's no word. You can't, it's like, the only way you have anything you do in your life that's, if you were on an island and you wrote a book, you wouldn't know if it was a good or a bad book. But you only know if it's right. Average when you compare it to other books. So I like the way that you presented that. That's what I took from it.
Yeah. And another spot we have is comparisons are odious.
Yeah.
So,
we all do it though. That. We all do it. I do it every day. I do it every day.
We do. And we judge ourselves, all the time. Our own performance, we judge someone else, and we judge everything. And certainly that's common nature. Our program is teaching you how to drop that judgment. But
why is it so hard for us to just, why is it so hard for us just to say, I'm okay? I mean, in other words, like, it's okay. I didn't make that important phone call I had to make today. It's okay. I've got a sticky note here of I'm supposed to call the vet to get my dog in. I mean, there's a part of us that just tortures ourselves like we weren't performance based. And it's like, I think through my meditation, I learned to just say, I didn't get it done. It's okay. It was meant to be that way today. And meditation's helped me deal with a lot of that anxiety I used to have. I didn't know if that's something you guys talk about in your programs.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of our program is being average and being okay with being average. And we do have a lot of spots about averageness. So, and that's really kind of contradictory to what the world is doing right now, where everyone has to be exceptional at something. But yeah, we have to stop and think like, yeah,
Just be
average is
you, right?
okay.
Just be you.
Right,
If you
right,
is
right.
exceptional, then you're exceptional. I know, a friend of our family's 22 years old, and he was the fourth pick in the NBA draft. Signed for $31 million. He's exceptional. Um, and so again, most kids aren't. If you compare yourself to that kid, and you're an
Right.
athlete, you're comparing yourself to Tiger Woods or Brad Pitt or whoever you want to, the Rolling Stones. Or we have that. I guess that ability of the seduction of a human is to compare ourselves to people. But unfortunately, we're not doing it to get inspiration. It's not inspiring a lot of people. I mean, some people, when someone's better than you, there's like this competitive desire kicks in. But for other people, it's imposter syndrome. It's why can't I be? Why is Angela so good at doing a podcast, and why can't I be as good as her? That's a slippery slope, especially for on brains that aren't fully formed yet.
Yeah, it is. And I think we can just really kind of stop and just compare ourselves against ourselves.
Hmm.
Did I do better than yesterday?
And if you didn't,
Maybe that's the
yeah,
right. Maybe that's the comparison we need.
yeah,
How was I at this last week compared to this week? Did I develop a new skill in that sport that I didn't have before? Right. Maybe that's where our comparison needs to be focused more inward instead of on everyone else.
One thing that we realized when we were working on some of our initiatives, Angela, was this concept of purpose. And for kids, and even for adults, I mean, the number one suicide percentage year over year in America was white middle-aged men. So even, you know, me could have a lack of purpose very easily. But with kids, it seems to be something that is fairly justifiable because student debt is through the roof, jobs aren't available, inflation's made things more expensive. Our generation could have done better with the global climate, and so the young kids are mad at us that we're not going to have a world to live in because you guys have ruined it. The oceans are full of plastic, and there's not enough food for humans. It's like I can see where kids really think that what's ahead of them is dismal, but the reality is it's not. I mean, if you look at everything across the board, we're so much better off as humans than we were 100 years ago, just even 50 years ago, in most areas. But so how do we find that pivot where we get kids to wake up in the morning and they're really damn excited about their lives instead of just getting up and just instantly feeling like, why am I going to college? You know,
Well,
that's a lot there, but
again, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but I was thinking about kind of those three things that you laid out
mm-hmm.
before, the expectations, the preparation, and the
Evolution. Yep.
evolution. And, climate change or any of those topics can be really daunting.
Mm-hmm.
And especially to young people, that the frontal lobe of the brain doesn't fully develop until the early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about that executive function of how do we plan to do something, how do we tackle a problem, and that's not even fully developed yet. So I could see why it would be kind of so overwhelming. But one of our tools and our spots that we focus on is when feeling overwhelmed, do things in part X. So let's break it down. And even when my kids come home with a paper they have to write, and we say, okay, well, let's break it down. Let's take it in part X. When is it due? When do we need to work backwards from that part?
Mm.
And how much do you need to get done every day? It becomes less daunting.
Yeah.
So if you do have one of those bigger, topics looming over you, climate change, how are we going to do it? Well, again, let's take it in part X and let's focus on your inner environment and what you have the control to
Mm.
do, to get that change to be done, one step at a time,
That's really,
basically.
really, that's good. advice. It got me thinking about a comment from a Gen Zer I had the other day about airplanes that are pouring chemicals, the chemtrail conspiracy, which, I don't subscribe to because I've seen airplanes with trails since I was a child, but
Right,
that
right.
there is an
Chemtrails,
industry
yeah.
out there, like, trying to get, so my son brought it up. He said, "What do you think about that, Dad?" And I said, "Well, if it was true, what can you do? What is there really you can do much about it?" So it's like worry and spend your time in the areas where you can control, like what you eat, what you watch, where you get your news from. You can't control if some random plane dumps chemical. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but let's focus on things we can control. And that's kind of what you're saying is let's don't worry about all the things out there that's so easy for kids to get wrapped up to, like global warming. I mean, there's nothing you can really do about it. Maybe you can do your small part with your carbon footprint, those type of things. That's fine. But at the end of the day, why would that keep you up at night? There's just nothing you can do about it. So I think you're right. I think this thing about trying to get kids to spend their time in the zone of area where they're spending their time in things they can control, and less worrying about all the other stuff, which is probably 95% of what happens every day in your life are things that are outside of your control.
And things that are probably common and average or trivial,
Right.
as we would call them
Yeah.
too. Yeah, about probably 95% of our lives are that. The big things like, marriage and divorce
Yeah.
and fire to your home or death, that
Yeah.
doesn't happen that often,
Right.
right? It's all these little things.
Do you think that the fact that kids don't have any experiences at a fairly young age, that everything seems monumental to them? As you get older, you kind of get some wisdom. You've had the relationships.
Perspective,
Yeah,
right?
you've had the relationships. You've buried, more than just your pet. Right now, if I got a call that someone I knew died, I'd be devastated. But I've been down this road now so many times. I think with kids, they don't have that perspective of looking back, and I think that's probably a big area where they struggle with, overreacting. That this not just the hormones and everything being all jacked up when you're a kid, but the fact they don't have any lens to have perspective on anything really in life, and so everything is just the end of the world, right?
Right. And you can't manufacture those
No,
experiences for kids. I mean, they
no,
have to have those, but again, by working out these little things that do happen, hopefully you're building resilience, and when those big things happen, you've got that tools and reference to say, okay, I can deal with this. I have some of the tools, I know this is a big situation, but I can still figure out a way to deal with it.
Do you think one of the problems has been that, every generation says the same thing? I want my kids to have it better, a little easier than me. And that's like a self-defeating prophecy. By virtue, you're basically just coddling each generation and making things easier for them that they're not really building. You mentioned resiliency like 10 times since you've been on the podcast. It's the same thing as Undeterred. But how are they learning anything if mom and dad do everything for them, or if you keep bad news from them? Somebody dies by suicide, and so you protect them and say, "Oh, they died of a heart attack." You're not really letting them know that stuff just irritates me to no end. And this is why these family cycle of these dysfunctional dynamics just keep repeating and repeating. Because, again, how do we go from when I grew up, we just figured it out. I had three brothers. My dad would say, go out and either fight or go build a fort, do something, just get out of the house. We don't do that anymore. I can sit here for hours in the summer and look out my back window, and I got great yards here that there should be football games going out here and kites flying and stuff. And I just see that as a big problem, a big impediment right now that we have to the fight we have as advocates for kids' mental health is we're up against the fact they don't leave their houses.
There are doctors now who are prescribing nature.
I heard that.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And some
It's
of the
free too.
European countries, and yeah, and I think it's catching on around the US too, is yeah, you know what? Just go out for a walk.
Yeah.
Okay. Just go breathe some fresh air, and nature can be calming and soothing.
Look, the good news
But
is Gen Z is the first generation to have mental wellness as their number one New Year's resolution. That's
That is
It's
true.
great.
You're right about that. I mean, I'm really grateful that we are at a point where we can talk about it openly.
Mm-hmm.
No one talked, but when
No,
I was a kid, no one was
no,
talking about my mental health or mental wellness to me,
never.
but I can have those conversations with my kids now. Very accepting, and it's at least we're at that good point in our society, at least.
Let's
However,
talking.
we got there.
I was talking about the
Yeah.
progress, that kids tend to look at fatalistic, nihilistic viewpoint that, this is the worst humanity's ever been. And you have to go back and compare. And a good example is the LGBTQ community. My youngest son came out as gay when he was 17. So, he's 19 now. And he's in a relationship. I've learned a lot. It's been a great experience for me. But I go back to think when I was in high school, along in the early 80s, I can't name one gay person. And they're there. And you look at the statistics for gay teens is 4 or 5 times more likely to take their own lives. So it's like, I think one good thing of where I'm going with the story is, Angela, is that we now can talk about it. My son can hold hands at the mall with his boyfriend. He couldn't have done that in the 80s. So there's a lot of progressions there. But again, why is it that these statistics aren't really linear? The more we learn about these things, you would think the better things would get. But the reality is it's not. And things like depression, again, Gen Z is the most depressed generation of all time. Why? Where
Well,
did that
Jeff,
go
and
off
I
the trail?
wonder,
Where did that
is
go off
it,
the rails?
yeah, I don't know. Is it because we're asking them though?
Could
And we
be.
didn't ask other
Good point.
generations?
Good point. We had
I
it
mean,
back then. We
do
just
we
didn't talk
have the
about it.
data,
Yeah.
right? Do we have the data and were people openly admitting
I'm sure that's a
20
lot
years
of it now
ago,
that I think
40
about it.
years ago?
Yeah.
So I don't know that we know, is it
Yeah.
just more prevalent or is it just that we're asking the questions now?
And that's a great perspective because you could see where statistics can get skewed pretty quickly if you don't put them in context of, maybe these things were happening when I was younger. We just didn't know about it.
We didn't know.
It's like without the internet, you don't know about an earthquake in Turkey, but now you do. I wasn't in high school. I wouldn't have known about that until the next day in the newspaper. It still happened. We just didn't know about it. So just because something you don't know about doesn't mean it didn't happen. So
It's hard to say. I mean, without looking for the studies that, did the research on, back in the 80s, we polled how many students in this age. And if we can compare that to today, I mean, it's hard to say how different it is. But we're more open now and we're asking.
another
So
question.
we know, and we certainly can't ignore it.
Yeah, I had a question I wanted to ask you before we left, but in regards to what's out there, all the available methods and coping mechanisms and alternative ways to look at mental health, where do you see the biggest tidal waves coming from? Like, where do you see the next big movement in the mental health space? And this doesn't have to be in line with what your projects are. This could just be a personal opinion. I kind of have mine, but I wanted to see where you thought the new frontier is for mental health, not just for kids, but just mental health in general.
Well, certainly there's been a lot of apps that are coming out to help people who, want something in the moment, handheld, or maybe they're not ready to seek professional help and in-person therapy. So
Right.
there's those options. We also are working on an app that, could be helpful to people. And I know you have one
Yep.
too. Um, that seems to be, just from the layperson's opinion, what I see coming out. People are looking for more things at their fingertips and perhaps not willing to admit that they have a need, have a problem, have a need for support, but yet, oh, look, if it's here, maybe I could use it.
Mm-hmm. I hesitate to ask you this question because we only have about a few minutes left, but there seems to be some alternative ways to look at mental health that are kind of looming out there. I think be more acceptable as time goes on, and the two things primarily would be brainwave technology research is out there. There's a company called Brain Health Restoration that I partnered with that does something called MERT technology. It's similar to TMS but different. So that's kind of out there that it isn't as heavily endorsed by the so-called experts. But, if you look at what's happening and nothing's really getting better, then we need to kind of, as a society, start adding more arrows to the quiver, not making it less. The other big one that I see, just based on some podcasts I've done and some people I've talked with, is in the psychedelic research space. Another whole podcast I've done. I've actually done full shows on psychedelic with regards to mental health, not anything really else. But, again, I think if you look at the fact that it wasn't too long ago, we were averaging 500 Americans a day that died from overdose, suicide, and alcohol. I think it was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe. It's 825 a day now. So, I mean, if we just go back to the old traditional ways that we've always done things, and then we sit back and expect that 825 to start going backwards, I think that is by itself the definition of insanity. So I'm not endorsing brainwave technology or psychedelic research, but I'm thinking, where are some areas we can start getting more data from? And again, not with the kids primarily, but this would be more for the adults that are looking to improve their mental health. I know with PTSD, and especially on the brainwave technology space, I know there's been a lot of research on PTSD and depression, things like that have seemed to have calibrated the brainwaves. I don't know. I'm frustrated at people dying, Angela. I'm really frustrated at people being
Yeah.
unhappy. I'm people quitting. And I'm like, I don't have an agenda. I want to try to find ways that I can collaborate with other like-minded people, find all available tools that when you are sitting in your room at the end of your bed and you thinking of ending your life, or you look at that bottle and you've been sober for 5 years and there's a bottle of wine, you could easily go open, that you just, something inside of you says, this is not a good choice. That's all I'm looking for. That's all I'm looking. I'm not looking for a magic pill. I'm not looking for anything other than just making sure people, when they get in those positions where they have to realize they're there, like you said, and one of your things, I love your first one's great. Briefly describe an incident. I like that framing of identifying where you're, instead of just going off your emotions. Hey, I need to, why am I here? What's the situation like? That assessment part is, I think, key. But anyway, as I'm wrapping this up, I just want to make sure that we all have an open mind and that we all, agree that some more can be done for us to benefit the well-being of other people.
Yeah, I agree. There's certainly not in my realm. There are lots of experts who are working on so much of
Yeah.
that, and our program is really focusing on, you have the power yourself. You have your own will to make changes, to make choices. Cognitive behavioral therapy
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah.
powerful, and using your own mind. It's not a magic pill, and not to say that medication might also be at play here to help people, but our program is really focused on, this is a will-based program, and you need to put the work and effort into it and do it yourself.
I love it. When I got thrown into this space, I initially was what I call a fentanyl dad. So I was one of the dads out there that were, I wanted to put every criminal in jail. I wanted to go to Mexico and fight the drug cartels. I wanted to take a barge to China and eradicate all the precursor chemicals. I was really focused on the supply side. And I realized pretty quickly that that's an exhaustive space, and it's not really rewarding for me. So I went to the demand side, which is what you're talking about. I went to the choices, the intervening before the intervention type idea. And so I think that's where I want to spend the rest of my advocacy is demand. Why are kids, why does one kid decide that a 12-pack of beer is the correct answer for their trauma, and another kid decides to go run 2 miles? I want to find out what that moment in time is in their brain that they make that decision. That cognitive, conscious decision really intrigues me. And that's the hunt I'm on. I don't know how, if I'm going to find an answer, but I'm not going to quit.
Well, I commend you for your work, Jeff. It's I think all of us together, we have to stop working in silos.
Yeah.
The partnerships of organizations together. Hopefully, we can be twice as powerful, right? And do 4 times as much as we could alone. So I thank you for the opportunity to partner with you on this podcast and bring our program to the teens and the young adults and any of the adults, of course, as well, listening to it. So I really appreciate that.
If we can flip the incentives, because everything's incentive based, and instead of being siloed, maybe the incentive is for me not to share my secrets to you because you may take them and make money on them instead of being, or maybe I'm going after a grant that you're going after, so I don't want to tell you about it. It's like that siloed effect has really been detrimental to progressing through some of these challenges that we've had. And if we can just all kind of say, oh, you know what, I have things I can bring to the table that you probably aren't using, but I know you have things. I know I've seen your things that you have that I'm not using. Why don't we find some way to work together? I don't see any downside. And the only limit to our creativity is our own minds. That's the only limit. Other than that, you and I should be able to look at both our initiatives. The next person I talk to should be able to do the same thing. And then all these kids out there that are struggling, they don't have to choose between Angela or Jeff. It's we. They could work with both of us somehow. It's like, I think that mindset is what keeps me going. I've hoped that we can work together. And if we can't, then I just have another new advocate that I can possibly, use their resource down the road if I need it. So how do people reach you? And I guess maybe in a nutshell, what's next? What's on the docket the next year or two for what your projects are all about? And then again, how do people get a hold of you?
So people can go to recoveryinternational.org. That's our website. You'll find lots of information about our meetings that we offer. If you're a newcomer, there's a newcomer page, so you can kind of learn some of the basics. We also have a website, poweryourmind.org, just for that program that I was talking about. But Angela at recoveryinternational.org, that's me. That's how to get me. I welcome anyone to send me an email. I'll be happy to answer questions and hopefully maybe partner with some of my youth leaders out there listening to this who are interested in bringing the program to the groups.
And Power Your Mind is available for anybody, whether they're part of the group or not. They can buy this.
Absolutely. It's sold on Amazon or in the bookstore portion of our website at recoveryinternational.org. So either of those places. Amazon's certainly easy for everyone to get to. And again, if you're having any problems finding that, just send me an email and I'm happy to work with anyone. Our goal is better mental health for everyone, and don't want anything to stand in the way of that. So that's probably your goal. That's probably all of our goal, right? In the end. So yeah, happy to talk to anyone and direct them wherever I can.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I admire your passion and your willingness to share a lot today. And again, keep living undeterred. And thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Have a good day. Endorse.